Hi, this is Richard Dunn at Avoca. Welcome back to this part on the rain. So in the last chapter we created the actual rain itself. Now in this part we're going to create the raindrops hitting the ground or any other objects that they intersect. So the first thing we want to do is go into the content browser and we're just going to select the ring texture that we made, and we're going to come in here and we're going to make a new material. And we're going to call that a material, and we're going to call it splash. Okay. So we're just going to right click on our package to save it. We're just going to select our texture and we're going to hold down T and click. Now what we're going to do here is just create an illusion of a particle. It doesn't actually render as such. It doesn't use the texture as such either. What it's doing is it's just using the texture to drive the visibility and the distortion. Whenever you're viewing something through water, you should always distort the UVs, very much like we did with the fire heat distortion. So what we've done here is we've just brought in our texture and we're just going to create a 3 constant color. So hold down the 3 key on the keyboard and click. Incidentally, this is another very good way of assessing colors that you're trying to type into something like the color by life module. Because you don't have access to the color as such in there, you're just dealing with numbers, you can always jump in here and just play with those numbers in here and see what it gives you, and then write these down and copy them over into the particle editor. So what we're doing here is we're giving this the color of the blue. So we're going to go with 0.25, 0.25 and 0.5. We'll change that one to 0.5, a little bit bluer. There we go. Now we're going to plug that into emissive, because all we're trying to do here is give our effect a color. Now we need to mask out what's not visible. Now what we need to do is we need to set this shader to the right settings. So we want to send it to blend translucent, and as with any other emitter we want to set it to unlit. And what we're going to do is plug this into opacity, and straight away we've masked everything out. Now we're going to multiply, so hold down M and click, and we're going to plug this into distortion, and we're going to plug this into the A, and we're going to multiply this by an amount, so we need to hold the 1 key and click, and the value that I've worked out previously is 12. We're going to plug that into there. Now what we will have here is distortion on the grid. If you can see that there, this grid is actually coming out and going around the shape of that ring that we made in the gradient. As you can see it here as well. So the ring is actually distorting the UVs behind it. You can see it there. That's because of this distortion node. So the other thing we have to do now is make this so that it can be colored in the particle by adding vertex color. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that up there and we're going to multiply this by a vertex color. So we'll just reconnect all these. So what we're going to do now is we're going to plug in just one of these channels. Because if you remember, the RGB contains 3 channels, RGB of course, and in this case, because the image is black and white, all those channels are going to have the same thing in them. So all we need to do is use that. If we use that, we're using all 24 bits of the image. we can reduce that 24 bits down to 8 bits by just choosing one of these flags, or pins. These little things are called pins. So what we're going to do is we're going to now hook up the vertex color. And we're just going to plug the alpha into B. And that is our finished raindrop material. That's all there is to it. So we're just going to compile that. And we're going to come back into our rain particle. Okay, we've got our rain particle back open. Let's give this a name. Let's call that one rain. Now we're going to create a new particle just by right clicking in here. And we're going to call this splash. Now obviously, as per usual, the first thing we need to do is hook up the material from the content browser. Just save our package. And we'll just find there's our rain splash material, and we'll just come into the splash required and load that in there. Now as you can see, we have those spawning just as they should, but of course this is not what we're looking for. So we can shut the content browser for now. We need to start playing with some of these settings to get these to behave properly. So what we'll do is first turn off the rain, just because it's distracting. And we're going to set this to velocity as well. We're going to set our emitter loops to 1. And then we're going to move down to spawn. And we only want one of those rings to spawn each time the raindrop hits the ground. So we're just going to set 1 for that. For lifetime, very, very short. 0.2 and 0.5. So between 0.2 and 0.5 of a second. For initial size, we're going to set these small as well. We're going to go 5, 5 and 0 for the max size, and we're going to go 3, 3, 0 for the min size. That's how big the particles are, how big the splashes are on the ground. So this parameter here will play an integral part in getting the look right. Now, initial velocity, we're only spawning these drops where they actually need to be and they don't move. So in this case, we can actually zero out everything here. Color by life we don't need to change. The next thing we want to do is we want to tell the rain that when it collides with something and the drop dies, that we want to spawn another effect. Cascade has a couple of nodes in here that are very, very powerful for this purpose. So what we want to do is on the rain particle here, we want to right click and we want to go event, event generator. So what we're doing is we're generating an event based off something. So in this case, what we're going to do is we have to create an event. At the moment we have nothing, so we need to click on this plus and we need to unroll that bar there, and we need to say we want to create based on death. Now we could say collision, but this node here has already caused our collision and has caused the death. So we're actually going to put death. and we want to leave all these settings except one thing. We need to actually give this event a name, and it's a name that can't be used anywhere else in the particle system. So let's call this spawn splash. And that there is pretty much all we need to do. What we then have to do is come over to the splash, and we need to add a node that's listening to this one. This is what a listener is, technically. So what this is going to do is it's going to listen for the name spawn splash, and then it's going to act on it. So what we want to do in here is we want to add an event receiver. So we want to go event receiver spawn, because we want to spawn our splashes. And we want to drag that one up underneath there. Now the settings for this, all we have to do is say we want to spawn the raindrop once. And come down to source, and we need to say what event type is it listening for. Well, we told it to do death, so let's click death. I'm going to get this ready so we can actually see what's happening. And the event name, which we typed in here, spawn splash. Just copy that so you don't type it wrong. We need to enter that in here. Now what's happening here is we don't appear to be able to see the drops, but they are actually there, they're happening. The reason we can't see it is at the moment they're spawning vertically, so we've got rings stuck into the terrain. What we have to do is we have to tell it to spawn these particles flat on the ground every single time. So we need to basically tell the particles, or the billboard sprites, to actually be flat on the ground. So we're going to come into here and we're going to go orientation lock axes. If we click on that and we tell it to just be on Z, suddenly we have raindrops on the ground. If we come down into here, you can see now we have little impact splashes procedurally off the rain, and they are actually happening for every single drop, but because there's a delay and all that sort of thing, just like real life, they appear to be out of sync a little bit. As you can see, keeping them small is a lot more realistic. So the next thing that we need to do now, if we look up here, this is all very, very good on flat surfaces, but what happens when these particles are actually spawning on the side of a hill? You can see here, they're actually, because they're lying flat in the world, they're penetrating into the side, which looks a little bit funny. So what we need to do is we need to do a little visual cheat. What we want to do is we want to say to these splashes, spawn at the depth of the rain as it is now, but offset them a little bit off the ground, not enough that you can see them. If you were in a prone position or something and you were crawling around the ground on your tummy, you may notice it, okay? But in general gameplay or third person or anything like that, this is how you would achieve the effect of making these particles look as though they lie flat on the ground. And it's very simple. All we do is we come in here, we come into location, and we want to offset. Now by default they haven't moved because they're at 0. But all we need to do is we need to set this to a vector constant, and we only want to move them up in Y. So let's just move them up 3 units. If we come back over here, as you can see, now they appear to be fully on the surface, even though they're not. They are sticking out slightly off the ground, but it's only a very, very small amount. Decals are the same. They don't actually lie on the surface. They are very slightly above the surface so that you don't get two surfaces fighting over what's visible. Now the last effect that we want to add to these drops is, if you look at them now, they're just appearing. When these rings happen in real life, they start as a point and they radiate out. So these need to get bigger over time. Even though that time is only half a second, it will make a huge difference visually having these radiate out. So what we want to do is we want to make them bigger over time, so size by life. So we'll come in here, size by life, and I've predetermined these. And what we want is we want to come down to the second point, so 1, and we just want to set this to 5. And we want to set these to 2. Now if we look at this, we need to slow it down to see it. You can see they are expanding slightly as they hit the ground. Probably not enough. So what we want to do is we want to come in here to the min, and let's set this to something like 0.2. And just watch for them. We can get one right in front of the camera. It would be really good. There we go. That's what we want. So let's put that back. So what we want to do now, we've set that as the minimum. Let's just make the max a little bit bigger. Let's try 5. Here we go. Now if we look at that in the scene, we have a very, very effective splash effect that is procedurally based off the rain itself. Now you could add another emitter to this, which actually has a vertical splash, the actual driplets of water going up into the air. I encourage you to give it a go and see if you can work out how to do that. But it's just a case now of really tweaking those dots, those rings. You might decide to make them bigger. That's really just a matter of taste. But the cost at this point is really only rendering as you can see there, just these little wee squares. This is why it's important to minimize the overdraw. So we're done with the particle editor on this one. And there's our effect. So what I'm going to show you now is a little tip on how to actually attach these effects to the player so that the player can actually walk around and have these effects follow them so that they're not needed throughout the entire level. So we'll do that in the next video.